The sound of shattering glass cut through the humid Atlanta night like a knife. Maya Rodriguez clutched the coffee pot tighter, her knuckles white against the stainless steel handle. 3 men had just walked into Benny's all-night diner, and everything about them screamed trouble. The way they moved, the way they looked at her, the way the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees the moment they crossed the threshold. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya had been working the graveyard shift at Benny's for 8 months now, ever since she'd moved to the city. She'd seen her share of late-night characters, truckers, insomniacs, people with nowhere else to go. But these 3 were different. They weren't here for coffee and pie. The first thing Maya noticed was their shoes. Expensive sneakers that didn't belong in a place like Benny's, where the vinyl booths were held together with duct tape and the floor tiles had seen better decades. The second thing she noticed was how they spread out immediately upon entering, like they'd done this before. The tall one with the neck tattoo took the booth nearest the exit. The stocky one with gold teeth positioned himself by the counter. The third, younger than the others, but somehow more menacing, slid into the booth directly facing the kitchen. Maya had been refilling the sugar dispensers when they walked in. Now she stood frozen behind the counter, the industrial coffee maker humming its familiar tune, completely oblivious to the tension that had just filled the room. The diner's neon sign flickered outside, casting intermittent red shadows across their faces. "Evening, sweetheart," the one by the counter said, his voice honey smooth but carrying an undertone that made Maya's skin crawl. "Quiet night." "Just the usual," Maya replied, forcing her voice to stay steady. She'd learned early in life not to show fear, a lesson taught by growing up in neighborhoods where weakness was currency you couldn't afford to spend. "Coffee?" Gold Teeth smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, we're looking for someone. Maybe you can help us out." Maya continued her task, methodically pouring sugar into the glass dispensers. Each grain seemed to fall in slow motion. "I just serve food and coffee. Don't really know the customer's business." "See, that's where you're wrong," Neck Tattoo called out from his booth. "Waitresses know everything. You hear things, you see things. People talk to you like you're invisible, but you're always listening, aren't you, Maya?" The sound of her name made her blood turn to ice. They knew who she was. This wasn't random. This wasn't just some late-night robbery gone wrong. They had come here specifically for her. Maya's hand trembled slightly as she set down the sugar container. Through the kitchen's pass-through window, she could see into the back alley where the dumpsters sat. The delivery entrance was 30 feet away, but it might as well have been 30 miles. The front door was closer, but Gold Teeth stood between her and freedom. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said, reaching for the coffee pot again. The familiar weight of it gave her something to focus on, something real to hold on to while her world tilted sideways. The young one in the booth laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Maya Rodriguez, 24 years old, originally from Phoenix. Moved to Atlanta 8 months ago. Lives in that little apartment above the laundromat on Ponce de Leon. Works here Tuesday through Saturday, midnight to 8 a.m. Each detail hit her like a physical blow. They'd been watching her. For how long? Days? Weeks? How had she not noticed? "Your brother Carlos sends his regards," Gold Teeth continued, pulling out his phone and showing her a photo. "Cute kid. 12 years old, right? Still goes to Roosevelt Middle School?" Maya's blood turned to liquid nitrogen. Carlos was supposed to be safe in Phoenix with their aunt. That was the whole reason she'd moved to Atlanta, to start fresh, to build something stable before bringing him out to live with her. The photo showed him walking out of school, backpack slung over one shoulder, completely unaware that someone was photographing him. "What do you want?" she asked, abandoning all pretense of normalcy. "See, your boyfriend Diego had a little problem. With our employer, Neck Tattoo explained, sliding out of his booth and walking closer to the counter. He borrowed some money, quite a bit of money, actually. And when the time came to pay it back, Diego decided to take a permanent vacation instead. Maya's mind raced. Diego Morales, she'd dated him for 6 months in Phoenix before everything fell apart. She'd broken up with him when she discovered he was dealing drugs, when she realized the expensive gifts and fancy dinners came from money that would eventually demand payback. That was over a year ago. She'd moved to Atlanta specifically to get away from all of that. "I haven't seen Diego in over a year," she said. "We broke up. I moved here to get away from all his drama." "Yeah, we know," the young one said, finally standing up from his booth. "But here's the thing. Diego told some people that you were his partner, that you helped him with his business, that you knew where he kept his money. That's a lie." "Maybe, but our employer doesn't really care if it's true or not. He cares about getting his money back. And if we can't find Diego, well ... quotes Gold Teeth shrugged. "You're the next best thing." Maya's training kicked in. Not training from any job or school, but the kind of education you get from growing up in neighborhoods where violence was always just around the corner. Her father had been a boxing coach before he died, and he'd taught her that the most dangerous moment in any fight wasn't when someone threw the first punch. It was in the seconds before, when everyone was still pretending this might end peacefully. "How much does he owe?" she asked, buying time while her eyes cataloged everything in her immediate vicinity. The coffee pot in her hand, 2 pounds of hot glass and metal. The industrial coffee maker behind her, scalding water and steam. The cash register to her left, solid, heavy, with sharp corners. 50,000, Neck Tattoo said casually, as if discussing the weather, plus interest, plus fees for making us come all the way out here to collect it. Maya almost laughed. She made $8 an hour plus tips at a diner that saw maybe 20 customers on a busy night. Her entire net worth was probably less than $2,000. These men might as well have asked her to fly to the moon. "I don't have that kind of money," she said. "We figured," Gold Teeth replied. "That's why we've come up with an alternative arrangement. You're going to come with us. Work off the debt. Our employer has several businesses that could use someone with your particular skills." Maya didn't need him to elaborate on what kind of businesses he meant. She'd grown up in neighborhoods where girls disappeared into that world and never came back the same, if they came back at all. "And if I refuse?" The young one pulled out his phone again, swiped to a new photo. This one showed her apartment building, her car parked outside. "Then we collect from your family instead. Starting with little Carlos." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. Maya could feel her pulse pounding in her temples, could taste copper in her mouth. But underneath the fear, something else was building. Something that had been sleeping for a long time, waiting for a moment exactly like this. "I need a minute to think," she said. "Take all the time you need," Gold Teeth said magnanimously. "But just so we're clear, you're not leaving this diner tonight without coming to an arrangement with us." Maya nodded, turned toward the coffee maker as if she was going to refill the pot. Her reflection stared back at her from the machines. Chrome surface, 24 years old, 5'6", 130 pounds. To anyone looking, she was just another scared waitress in over her head. They had no idea who they were dealing with, because Maya Rodriguez hadn't just moved to Atlanta to escape her past with Diego. She'd moved to escape a different past entirely. One that involved 3 years in the Army, 2 tours overseas, and training that had taught her exactly how to handle situations like this. She'd spent 8 months trying to be someone else, trying to live a quiet life serving coffee, and pretending the skills she'd learned in the desert didn't exist anymore. But some things, once learned, can never be unlearned. Maya's fingers tightened around the coffee pot handle as she made her decision. These men had made 2 critical mistakes. First, they'd threatened her family. Second, They'd assumed that because she was a waitress, she was helpless. In about 30 seconds, they were going to learn just how wrong they were. Maya's reflection in the chrome coffee machine showed a woman who had spent months perfecting the art of invisibility. But the face staring back at her now belonged to someone else entirely, someone who had learned to survive in places where survival wasn't guaranteed. The transformation wasn't visible to the three men behind her. They saw the same petite waitress, in a faded uniform, the same woman who had been pouring coffee and taking orders for 8 months. They couldn't see the mental calculations happening at lightning speed, the tactical assessment that had become second nature during her time in Kandahar. 3 hostels. Neck tattoo was 6'2", approximately 200 pounds, positioned 12 feet from her location near the window booth. Athletic build but favoring his left side, old injury, possibly a knee. Gold teeth was a 5'10", heavier set, standing 4 feet to her right by the pie display case. The dominant hand appeared to be his right, based on how he held his phone. The young one was the wild card, smaller but twitchy, high energy, probably running on something stronger than caffeine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The diner's layout worked in her favor. Narrow aisles between booths would limit their movement. The counter created a natural barrier. Most importantly, they had positioned themselves assuming she was trapped, not realizing they had just cornered themselves with the most dangerous person in the room. Maya had never told anyone about her military service, not even the other waitresses at Benny's. When people asked about the small scar on her left hand or why she sometimes flinched at unexpected sounds, she'd made up stories about childhood accidents and nervous habits. The truth was buried in classified files and nightmares she preferred not to revisit. Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez, 75th Ranger Regiment. 3 years of active duty, 2 deployments to Afghanistan. Specialized training in close-quarters combat, tactical firearms, and what the Army politely called enhanced interrogation techniques. She'd been 21 when she came home, carrying skills that had no civilian application and memories that therapy couldn't quite erase. The transition to civilian life had been brutal. The structure of military service, the clarity of mission, objectives, the brotherhood of soldiers who understood what they'd all been through. None of that existed in the real world. Maya had tried college, tried office jobs, tried dating men who couldn't understand why she sometimes woke up screaming or why crowded spaces made her hyper-aware of every exit route. Phoenix had become suffocating. Every corner held reminders of a past she wanted to forget, including Diego and his increasingly dangerous associates. When Carlos needed stability and their aunt volunteered to take him in temporarily, Maya saw an opportunity for a fresh start. Atlanta was far enough away to feel like escape, but close enough that she could bring Carlos to live with her once she got established. For 8 months, the plan had worked. She'd found the apartment, found the job, found a rhythm that felt almost normal. She'd even started thinking about enrolling in community college, maybe studying business management. The nightmares were less frequent. The hypervigilance was starting to fade. Until tonight. "Time's up, sweetheart," Gold Teeth called out, his patience clearly wearing thin. "What's it gonna be?" Maya turned around slowly, the coffee pot still in her hand. She'd made her decision, but the 3 men didn't know it yet. In her experience, the element of surprise was worth more than size, strength, or numbers combined. "You know what?" she said, her voice steady now, all traces of fear carefully hidden. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." She walked toward Gold Teeth, closing the distance to 3 feet. Close enough to see the gold caps on his molars. Close enough to smell the cologne that couldn't quite mask the scent of cigarettes and cheap whiskey. "See, I've been thinking about what you said," Maya continued, setting the coffee pot down on the counter within easy reach. "About Diego owing your boss money. About me being responsible for his debts. Smart girl, Gold Teeth said, relaxing slightly. He thought he'd won. I knew you'd see reason. The thing is, Maya said, reaching into her apron pocket as if going for something, I think your boss needs to know the truth about Diego. The movement made all three men tense up. Neck Tattoo's hand moved toward his jacket. The young one took a step forward. Gold Teeth's eyes narrowed. Maya pulled her hand out of her pocket slowly, showing them her phone. See, I recorded some conversations with Diego before we broke up. Insurance, you might say. Evidence of exactly who he was working with, where the money was really going. This was a complete lie, but Maya had learned in Afghanistan that information. Warfare was often more effective than kinetic warfare. Give the enemy something to think about, make them recalculate their position, and opportunities would present themselves. You're bluffing, the young one said, but Maya could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Am I? Maya asked, thumbing through her phone with practiced casualness. Would you like to hear Diego talking about Marcus Williams? About the shipment that got intercepted last year. About how your boss never found out who tipped off the D. The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. Maya had thrown out random names and scenarios, gambling that men like these always had secrets they were afraid of having exposed. The looks that passed between them told her she'd hit something close to home. Give me that phone, Gold Teeth demanded, reaching toward her dot. This was the moment Maya had been waiting for. The moment when Gold Teeth committed to a movement that would put him off balance. The moment when his attention focused on the phone instead of her free hand. Maya grabbed the coffee pot with her left hand and swung it in a tight arc toward Gold Teeth's temple. 2 pounds of glass and metal moving at maximum velocity, aimed at the most vulnerable part of his skull. The impact made a sound like a watermelon hitting concrete. Gold Teeth dropped immediately, his legs folding under him as if someone had cut the strings holding him upright. The coffee pot shattered against the side of his head, sending glass fragments and lukewarm coffee across the black and white checkered floor. Maya didn't pause to admire her handiwork. The moment Gold Teeth started falling, she was already moving toward the industrial coffee maker behind her. Muscle memory took over, the same muscle memory that had kept her alive during night raids in Afghan compounds where hesitation measured in milliseconds meant the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. Neck Tattoo was fast. Faster than his size suggested he should be. His hand was already inside his jacket, going for what Maya assumed was a weapon, when she grabbed the steel carafe from the coffee maker and hurled it at his face. The carafe was half full of coffee that had been brewing for hours, hot enough to cause second-degree burns on contact. Neck Tattoo screamed as the scalding liquid hit him, his hands instinctively going to his face instead of completing his reach for his weapon. Maya vaulted over the counter in one fluid motion, landing in a combat crouch 3 feet from where Neck Tattoo stood pawing at his burned face. She drove her right elbow up into his solar plexus with the full force of her body weight behind it. The technique was called a power elbow strike in her hand-to-hand combat training. Executed properly, it could incapacitate a target twice her size by temporarily paralyzing the diaphragm. Neck Tattoo made a sound like air being let out of a balloon and doubled over, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. Maya didn't give him time to recover. She brought her knee up into his face as he bent forward, feeling the cartilage in his nose give way under the impact. Blood exploded across his features as he crashed backward into the booth where he'd been sitting just moments before. 20 seconds had elapsed since she grabbed the coffee pot. 2 men were down. 1 to go. The young one had frozen during the initial chaos, his brain apparently unable to process the transformation of the harmless waitress into something significantly more dangerous. But he was recovering now, his hand moving toward his waistband with renewed urgency. Maya launched herself across the narrow aisle between the counter and the booths, covering the distance before he could complete his draw. She hit him in a flying tackle that would have made her high school football coaches proud, driving him backward into the window booth with enough force to crack the reinforced glass behind them. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and overturned furniture. The young one was stronger than he looked, wiry muscle and street-fighting desperation, giving him an edge that Maya's training couldn't entirely overcome. He managed to get his hands around her throat, his thumbs pressing against her windpipe. With murderous intent, Maya had been choked before. It was part of her advanced combat training, learning to fight when oxygen was limited and panic was trying to take over. She tucked her chin to protect her airway and drove both thumbs into the pressure points just below his earlobes. The technique, taught by a particularly sadistic instructor at Fort Benning, targeted nerve clusters that could cause temporary paralysis. When pressed correctly, the young one's grip on her throat loosened as his nervous system sent conflicting signals to his hands. Maya rolled away from him and got to her feet, grabbing a heavy ceramic mug from the table as she stood. The young one was trying to sit up, shaking his head to clear the fog from the pressure point attack, when she brought the mug down on the back of his skull with surgical precision. The mug shattered on impact. The young one slumped forward and was still. 30 seconds. 3 men. All of them unconscious or incapacitated. Maya stood in the wreckage of Benny's all-night diner, breathing hard but controlled, surveying the damage with the same clinical detachment she'd used to assess combat zones in Afghanistan. Gold Teeth was unconscious but breathing, blood seeping from the head wound caused by the coffee pot. Neck Tattoo was curled in a fetal position, alternating between gasping for air and moaning about his broken nose. The young one was face down. In the booth, unmoving but with a steady pulse when Maya checked. None of them were going to die, which was intentional. Maya had been trained to kill when necessary, but these men were more valuable alive. They had information she needed, connections she could trace, employers who needed to understand that threatening her family came with consequences they weren't prepared to face. But first, she needed to secure the scene and figure out her next move. The men had phones, weapons, probably fake identification. They'd mentioned an employer who was clearly involved in organized crime. Most importantly, they'd shown her photographs of Carlos, which meant there were other people in Phoenix who knew where to find him. Maya walked behind the counter and retrieved her own phone, speed dialing a number she hadn't called in 8 months. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Rodriguez? I thought you were out." "I am out, Sergeant," Maya replied, falling back into the formal cadence that had shaped 3 years of her life. "But I need a favor." "Martinez speaking." The voice on the other end of the line belonged to Master Sergeant Elena Martinez, Maya's former squad leader and the closest thing to family she'd had during her military service. Elena had been the one to recommend Maya for ranger training, the one who'd pulled strings to get her the specialized assignments, and the one who'd tried to convince her to re-enlist when her tour was up. "I need you to make some calls," Maya said, stepping over Gold Teeth's unconscious form as she moved toward the diner's front door. She flipped the sign from open to closed and turned the deadbolt. "Phoenix PD has some contacts in organized crime intelligence. I need to know everything about a crew that's collecting debts for someone connected to Diego Morales. Jesus Rodriguez. What kind of trouble are you in?" Maya looked back at the 3 unconscious men sprawled across the diner. Neck Tattoo was starting to stir, making soft groaning sounds as consciousness slowly returned. She had maybe 10 minutes before he was coherent enough to be a problem again. "The kind that involves threats against Carlos," she said simply. The line went quiet for a moment. Elena had met Carlos during one of his visits to Maya's base housing, had watched him struggle with their father's death and Maya's deployment. She understood what the boy meant to Maya, understood that anyone threatening him had just declared war on the wrong person. "Give me 20 minutes, Elena said. "And Rodriguez? Whatever you're planning, don't do anything stupid until we talk." "Maya." ended the call, and began systematically searching for her attackers. Gold Teeth had a wallet containing 3 different driver's licenses, all with different names but the same photograph. His real name appeared to be Vincent Carlucci, according to a business card tucked behind the fake IDs that listed him as a collections specialist for something called Meridian Financial Services. Neck Tattoo's wallet identified him as Jerome Washington, with an address in College Park. More interesting was the burner phone in his jacket pocket, which contained dozens of text messages in what appeared to be code. Numbers, locations, abbreviations that meant nothing to Maya, but would probably make sense to someone familiar with drug distribution networks. The young one carried no identification at all, but his phone was a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. Photos of various people entering and leaving buildings, license plate numbers, what looked like surveillance notes. Maya scrolled through the messages and found references to the Phoenix situation and cleanup protocols. Her blood turned cold when she found a message thread labeled Asset Recovery, Atlanta. The most recent message, sent just 3 hours ago, read, Package secured, moving to Phase 2. Advise on disposal protocols for secondary assets. Secondary assets. They were talking about Carlos. Maya's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Elena's number. Talk to me, Maya answered. Vincent Carlucci, age 34, works for a man named Anthony Torino, Alina said without preamble. Torino runs a loan operation out of Phoenix that's been on the DEA's radar for 2 years. They're suspected of laundering money through legitimate businesses, but nobody's been able to make charges stick. What about Diego? Your ex-boyfriend borrowed $50,000 from Torino 6 months ago. Word is he was supposed to use it to expand his territory, cut Torino in on the profits. Instead, Diego disappeared with the money and hasn't been seen since. Maya absorbed this information while keeping one eye on her prisoners. Jerome Washington was definitely regaining consciousness, his eyes starting to focus despite the swelling around his broken nose. Here's the interesting part, Elena continued. According to my contact in Phoenix PD, Torino's been asking questions about you for weeks. Someone told him you and Diego were partners, that you might know where he stashed the money. Someone's lying, Maya said. Maybe, or maybe someone wants Torino to think you know something you don't. Either way, you're in the middle of a situation that's bigger than one missing boyfriend and $50,000. Maya felt the pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Diego hadn't just stolen money from Anthony Torino, he'd apparently told people that Maya was involved in his business. Whether that was intentional misdirection or just Diego's typical inability to take responsibility for his own actions, the result was the same. She'd become a target. There's something else, Elena said. Torino's operation isn't just local anymore. He's got connections in Atlanta, Miami, and Las Vegas. If he sent people after you, this isn't going to end when you deal with these 3. Jerome Washington chose that moment to sit up, blood streaming down his face from his broken nose. His eyes found Maya across the diner, and she could see the moment when he remembered what had happened to him. Rage and humiliation warred with fear as he took in the scene, his unconscious partners, the woman who had put them all down, the phone in her hand that suggested she wasn't as isolated as they'd assumed. You have no idea what you just did, he said, his voice thick and nasal from the broken cartilage. Maya walked over to him, crouching down so they were at eye level. Up close, she could see that Jerome Washington was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe 25, with the kind of build that came from prison workouts and street violence rather than military training. Actually, I know exactly what I did, she replied calmly. I neutralized 3 hostiles who threatened my family. The question is, do you know what happens next? Jerome tried to straighten up, wincing as movement sent fresh waves of pain through his damaged face. Torino's got people everywhere. You think beating us up solves anything? There's 10 more just like us ready to finish what we started. Elena, you still there? Maya said into the phone. I'm here. I'm going to need that favor we talked about. The one you said I could call in whenever I wanted. There was a pause. On the other end of the line. The favor Elena owed Maya dated back to Afghanistan, to a night when Maya had disobeyed direct orders to extract Elena's squad from a compromised position. Maya had never asked for details about what Elena could do for her in return, but they both understood it was significant. What do you need? Elena asked. I need Anthony Torino to receive a message tonight, the kind of message that makes him reconsider his current course of action. Jerome's eyes widened as he realized Maya wasn't just some waitress who'd gotten lucky in a fight. The way she spoke, the calm professionalism in her voice, the fact that she apparently had military contacts who could reach organized crime figures, it was starting to dawn on him that he and his partners had made a catastrophic miscalculation. What kind of message? Elena asked. Maya looked directly at Jerome as she answered. Tell him that Maya Rodriguez is not Diego Morales. Tell him that threatening her family was the last mistake his organization will ever make. And tell him that he has 24 hours to call off his dogs before this situation escalates beyond his ability to control. Rodriguez, you can't go to war with the entire Torino organization. They've got resources, connections, people in law enforcement. So, do I? Maya interrupted. Or did you forget who trained me? Elena was quiet for a long moment. Maya could almost hear the mental calculations happening on the other end of the line. The assessment of risks and options that every good soldier learned to make instinctively. All right, Elena said finally, but I'm coming to Atlanta. Whatever. You're planning, you're not doing it alone. Elena, you don't have to. The hell I don't. You saved my life in Kandahar, and you saved the lives of 6 other soldiers that night. If some two-bit loan shark thinks he can threaten Rodriguez's family, he's about to learn why the Rangers have a reputation. Maya felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with adrenaline or combat chemicals. For 8 months, she'd been trying to handle civilian life on her own, trying to be someone she wasn't, trying to pretend that the bonds forged in combat could be replaced by normal relationships with normal people. But some things ran deeper than geography, or time, or the desire to leave the past behind. Elena Martinez had been there when Maya learned that her father had died while she was deployed. Elena had been there when Maya received the Dear John letter from her high school boyfriend who couldn't handle dating someone overseas. Elena had been there through the worst moments of Maya's military service, and she was offering to be there now. 24 hours, Maya said into the phone. I'll send you the details. She ended the call and focused her attention back on Jerome, who had been listening to every word with growing alarm. Here's what's going to happen, Maya said to him. You're going to call Anthony Torino and tell him that you found me. You're going to tell him that I don't have his money. I don't know where Diego is, and I'm not the person he's looking for. He's not going to believe that. Then you're going to make him believe it. Because if he doesn't, if he sends more people after me, or if anything happens to my brother, I'm going to hunt down every single person in his organization and show them exactly what 3 years of military training looks like when it's applied to civilian targets. Jerome stared at her for a long moment, taking in the absolute certainty in her voice, the professional competence that had allowed her to take down 3 armed men in 30 seconds. Whatever he saw in her eyes convinced him that she wasn't bluffing. What about us? He asked, gesturing toward his unconscious partners. That depends on how convincing you are when you make that phone call, Maya replied. If Torino agrees to leave me and my family alone, you walk out of here with some bruises and a story about how you got jumped by a gang. If he doesn't, she let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished but heavy with implication. Jerome nodded slowly, reaching for his phone with trembling fingers. As he dialed, Maya walked to the diner's front window and looked out at the empty street. Atlanta's Neon skyline glittered in the distance, a reminder of the life she'd been building before tonight's events shattered her. Carefully constructed normalcy. She'd come to this city to escape violence, to find peace, to create something stable for herself and eventually for Carlos. But violence had followed her anyway, dragged her back into a world where survival depended on being harder, faster, and more ruthless than the people who wanted to hurt you. Maya had spent 8 months trying to forget who she was, trying to pretend that Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was someone she used to be, rather than someone she would always be. Tonight had reminded her that some transformations were permanent, that some skills could never be unlearned, and that some bonds to family, to fellow soldiers, to the people who mattered most, were worth fighting for no matter what the cost. Jerome was speaking quietly into his phone, his voice urgent and pleading. Maya couldn't make out all the words, but she could hear enough to know he was trying very hard to convince someone that continuing this particular war would be a mistake. For his sake, and for the sake of everyone involved, Maya hoped Anthony Torino was smart enough to listen. The phone call between Jerome and Anthony Torino lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Maya timed it while she zip-tied Gold Teeth's hands behind his back using cable ties she'd found in Benny's supply closet. Vincent Carlucci was still unconscious, but Maya had learned in Afghanistan that unconscious enemies had a tendency to become conscious at inconvenient moments. Jerome's side of the conversation consisted mostly of "yes, sir," and "no, sir," punctuated by increasingly desperate explanations about how the simple collection job had gone sideways. Maya caught fragments about military training and serious resistance, and maybe we should reconsider the approach. When Jerome finally hung up, his face had gone pale beneath the dried blood from his broken nose. "Well," Maya asked. "He wants to talk to you." Maya raised an eyebrow. "On the phone?" "In person. Tomorrow night. Neutral location." Jerome wiped blood from his upper lip with the back of his hand. "He says if you're telling the truth about not having his money, maybe you can help him find Diego instead." This was not what Maya had expected. In her experience, crime bosses didn't invite people who had just hospitalized their employees to sit-down meetings. They sent more employees with bigger weapons and instructions to solve the problem permanently. What changed his mind? She asked. Jerome hesitated, then seemed to decide that honesty was his best chance of survival. "I told him what you did to us, all of us, how long it took. He asked questions about your training, your background. When I mentioned you had military contacts who could reach him." Jerome shrugged. He got real quiet. Started asking different questions. Maya filed this information away for later analysis. Anthony Torino was apparently smart enough to recognize that she represented a different category of problem than his usual debtors and deadbeats. Smart criminals were often more dangerous than stupid ones, but they were also more likely to be reasonable when presented with compelling arguments. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Elena. "Flight lands at 6 a.m., bringing party favors. Don't start without me." Party favors was Elena's code for weapons and tactical equipment. Maya felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and dread at the thought of gearing up for combat again. She'd told herself that part of her life was over. But apparently the universe had other plans. Gold Teeth, Vincent Carlucci, chose that moment to regain consciousness. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as he took in his surroundings. The zip ties around his wrists. The overturned furniture. Jerome sitting in a booth with blood all over his face. The young one still motionless in the window booth. "What the hell happened?" Carlucci asked, his voice thick and slurred. "You got schooled by a waitress," Jerome said bitterly. "And now we're all in deep shit because Torino wants to have a conversation." Carlucci tested the zip ties, realized they weren't going anywhere, and focused his attention on Maya. The look in his eyes was different from Jerome's, less fear, more calculation. Vincent Carlucci was a professional, Maya realized. The kind of man who viewed setbacks as learning experiences rather than disasters. "You're not just a waitress," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Maya replied simply. "I'm not. Military? Rangers?" Carlucci nodded as if this explained everything. "How many tours?" "2. Afghanistan or Iraq?" "Afghanistan." Carlucci was quiet for a moment, processing this information. When he spoke again, his tone had changed completely, less threatening, more respectful. It was the same shift Maya had noticed in civilian contractors overseas when they learned she was combat infantry rather than support personnel. "Look," Carlucci said, "this whole thing got off on the wrong foot. We came in here thinking we were dealing with some civilian who got mixed up with the wrong guy. If we'd known you were military ... you would have what? Brought more men? Better weapons? We would have approached it differently," Carlucci said carefully. "Shown more respect for your service." Maya almost laughed. Vincent Carlucci was trying to appeal to some imaginary code of honor between veterans, as if shared military experience created a bond that transcended the fact that he'd threatened to kidnap her and hurt her family. "Where did you serve?" she asked. "Marines. 2 tours. In Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Got out in 2018. This explained the tactical awareness, the way he'd positioned himself near the exit, the professional competence that had made him more dangerous than Jerome or the young one. Vincent Carlucci had learned the same lessons Maya had learned in the same places, facing the same kinds of threats. The difference was what they'd each done with those lessons after coming home. "What happened?" Maya asked. "How does a Marine end up working collections for a loan shark?" Carlucci's expression hardened. "Same thing that happens to a lot of us. Came home to a country that didn't know what to do with people like us. Couldn't hold down civilian jobs. Couldn't relate to people who'd never been in the shit. Started drinking too much, fighting too much, burning through relationships and opportunities." Maya recognized the story because she'd almost lived it herself. The transition from military to civilian life was brutal under the best circumstances, and not everyone made it through intact. "Torino recruits veterans," Carlucci continued. "Pays better than any civilian job I could get. Uses skills that actually transfer from combat experience. And he takes care of his people, medical, dental, even helps with the VA paperwork. He also has you threaten waitresses and kidnap children," Maya pointed out. "Usually our targets are drug dealers who've ripped off their suppliers," Carlucci said. "People who chose to enter this world and understand the consequences of stealing from dangerous men. What happened tonight? This isn't how we normally operate." Maya felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for Vincent Carlucci. She could easily imagine an alternate version of her own story, where the loneliness and alienation of civilian life had led her down similar paths. The only difference was that she'd had Carlos to think about, a reason to stay on the right side of the law even when everything else was falling apart. But sympathy didn't change the fact that he'd walked into her workplace with threats against her family. "The young one," she said, looking toward the window booth where the third man remained unconscious. "What's his story?" "Tommy Morrison. 22 years old, never served. Grew up in the system, aged out of foster care with no education. And no prospects." Carlucci glanced toward the booth with something that might have been concern. "Torino took him in when he was 18, gave him purpose and structure. Kid would do anything for the boss." Maya walked over to check on Tommy Morrison. His pulse was steady and his breathing was regular, but he'd been unconscious for almost 20 minutes. She'd hit him harder than she'd intended, muscle memory and adrenaline combining to deliver more force than was strictly necessary. "He's going to be fine," she told Carlucci, though she made a mental note to monitor Tommy's condition. Head injuries were unpredictable, And despite everything that had happened tonight, she didn't want anyone's death on her conscience. Her phone rang. Elena's number. "Change of plans," Elena said without preamble. "I've got more information about your Anthony Torino situation." Maya walked toward the kitchen for privacy, stepping over the debris from her earlier encounter. "What kind of information?" "The kind that explains why he wants to meet with you instead of just sending more thugs. Torino's not just some loan shark, Rodriguez. He's connected to people who make loan sharks look like kindergarten teachers." "Connected how?" "Remember Operation Iron Fist? The multi-agency task force that was investigating arms trafficking between Afghanistan and the Southwest United States?" Maya remembered. Iron Fist had been classified above her clearance level, but rumors about it had circulated through every forward operating base in Afghanistan. Allegations of weapons disappearing from U.S. military stockpiles, shipping manifests that didn't match actual inventory, serial numbers that showed up on weapons recovered from crime scenes in Phoenix and Las Vegas. Torino was one of the civilian contractors they were investigating, Elena continued. Never enough evidence to bring charges, but his name came up repeatedly in connection with missing equipment. The kind of equipment that requires military training to operate effectively. "You're saying he's trafficking military weapons?" "I'm saying he's got connections to people who have access to military weapons, and he knows the difference between someone who's just tough and someone who's been professionally trained to kill people." When Jerome described what you did to 3 armed men in 30 seconds, Torino didn't hear about a lucky waitress. He heard about someone with the kind of training that only comes from one place. Maya processed this information while watching Jerome and Carlucci through the kitchen pass-through. Both men were listening intently to her end of the conversation, trying to piece together what they were hearing. "He wants to recruit me," she realized. "That's my guess. Think about it. He's got an organization full of ex-military muscle. He's dealing with supply chains that require tactical expertise, and he just discovered there's a former ranger working as a waitress in Atlanta. From his perspective, you're not a problem to be solved. You're an asset to be acquired." The pieces of Anthony Torino's puzzle were starting to make sense. The meeting request, the sudden change in approach, even the fact that he was willing to overlook what had happened to his men tonight. He wasn't looking at Maya as Diego's vengeful ex-girlfriend anymore. He was looking at her as potential middle management in a criminal organization that apparently dealt in military-grade weapons. "What's the play?" Maya asked. "That depends on how far you're willing to go to protect Carlos," Elena said. "Because I've got a feeling this isn't going to end with a polite conversation and everyone walking away." Maya looked back toward the dining room, where 3 men sat among the wreckage of what had been her quiet civilian life just a few hours ago. Vincent Carlucci was watching her with the calculating expression of a professional soldier assessing a potential ally or enemy. Jerome was holding a blood-soaked napkin to his nose and probably wondering how his simple collection job had turned into a recruitment interview. Tommy Morrison was starting to stir in the window booth, his eyes fluttering. As consciousness slowly returned, all of them were dangerous in their own ways. All of them worked for a man who apparently had connections to weapons trafficking, official corruption, and the kind of organized crime that spanned multiple states and involved millions of dollars. And tomorrow night, Maya was going to sit down across a table from Anthony Torino and pretend to negotiate while trying to find a way to eliminate the threat to her family permanently. "Elena," she said into the phone, "remember that conversation we had about rules of engagement in asymmetric warfare scenarios?" "I remember. I think it's time to review our notes." By 4 a.m., Benny's all-night diner looked almost normal again. Maya had spent the past 2 hours methodically cleaning up the evidence of what had occurred, while her 3 uninvited guests sat under her watchful supervision and contemplated how dramatically their evening had deviated from the original plan. Tommy Morrison had regained consciousness an hour ago, groggy and disoriented but apparently suffering no permanent damage from Maya's ceramic mug introduction to the back of his skull. He sat quietly in the corner booth, pressing an ice pack against the growing lump on his head and stealing occasional glances at the woman who had single-handedly dismantled his entire crew. "So what happens now?" Jerome asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the diner like dust after an explosion. Maya finished mopping the last of the coffee stains from the checkered floor and leaned the mop against the counter. The physical activity had helped her think through the tactical situation, and she'd reached some uncomfortable conclusions about the path forward. "Now you go back to Anthony Torino and tell him I'll meet with him," she said, "but not on his terms." "Vincent." Carlucci looked up from the ice pack he'd been holding against his own head wound. "What do you mean?" "I mean the meeting happens somewhere public, somewhere neutral, and somewhere I can control the variables." Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through the contacts until she found the number she was looking for. "I know a place." She hit dial and waited through 3 rings before a familiar voice answered. "Blackwood Security, this is Sarah." "Sarah, it's Maya Rodriguez. I need to call in that favor." Sarah Blackwood had been Maya's roommate during advanced infantry training at Fort Benning. She'd left the Army 2 years before Maya, using her military police background and connections to start a private security consulting firm in Atlanta. Blackwood Security specialized in executive protection and threat assessment for corporate clients, which meant Sarah had access to resources that most civilians could only dream of. "Maya, Jesus, it's been 6 months since we talked? What kind of favor are we talking about?" "The kind that involves a secure meeting space, electronic surveillance countermeasures, and maybe some backup if things go sideways." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sarah had always been quick to read between the lines, and she was clearly picking up on the subtext of Maya's request. "How much trouble are you in?" Sarah asked. "The kind that involves organized crime, weapons trafficking, and threats against family members." Another pause, longer this time. Maya could practically hear Sarah's mental gears turning, weighing the risks and benefits of getting involved in whatever situation her former roommate had stumbled into. "When do you need this?" Sarah asked finally. "Tomorrow night." "Short notice, I know. But Sarah, these people threatened Carlos. That settled it." Sarah had been there during the worst period of Maya's deployment, when news of their father's death had nearly broken Maya's resolve to complete her tour. Sarah understood that Carlos wasn't just Maya's brother. He was the only family she had left, and the only thing that had kept her grounded during the darkest moments of her military service. "All right," Sarah said. "I've got a client who owns a private dining room at the Marriott downtown. Completely secure, multiple exit routes, and I can have a full surveillance package in place by tomorrow afternoon. But Maya, if this goes bad..." "It won't," Maya said with more confidence than she felt. "At least not in the way anyone expects." She ended the call and found 3 pairs of eyes staring at her with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. "You're really going to meet with Torino," Tommy said. It was the first thing he'd said since regaining consciousness, and his voice carried a note of disbelief. "I'm going to end this situation," Maya replied. "One way or another." Vincent Carlucci shifted in his seat, testing the zip ties that still held his hands behind his back. "You know, if you're serious about this meeting, I might be able to help. You understand what you're walking into." Maya studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. Carlucci had been professional and relatively respectful since regaining consciousness, but that didn't mean he wasn't still working an angle. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "Because I've been where you are," Carlucci said. "Coming back from overseas, trying to figure out how to live in a world that doesn't make sense anymore, looking for something that feels like purpose. The difference is, you've got something worth protecting. I never did." Maya felt an uncomfortable recognition in his words. The isolation, The sense of displacement, the feeling that civilian life was somehow less real than the intensity of combat. These were experiences that bonded veterans across service branches and political affiliations. "What's Torino really like?" she asked. "Smart, ruthless when he needs to be, but not needlessly violent. He prefers to solve problems through negotiation and leverage rather than force." Carlucci paused. "But he's also paranoid and doesn't trust easily. If he's agreed to meet with you, it's because he thinks you can be useful to him." "Useful how?" "His organization has been expanding rapidly over the past 2 years. New territories, new operations, new types of merchandise. That kind of growth requires people with specialized skills, logistics, security, tactical planning. People who can handle complex operations without constant supervision." Jerome snorted. "He wants to offer you a job." "It's more than that," Carlucci said. "Torino's been looking for someone to run his Atlanta operations. Someone with military experience who can interface with his other regional managers without getting caught up in territorial disputes or ego conflicts." Maya processed this information while considering the broader implications. If Anthony Torino was indeed involved in weapons trafficking, and if he was looking to expand his Atlanta operations, then offering her a management position made perfect sense from his perspective. She had the military background to understand his merchandise, the tactical training to handle security concerns, and no apparent criminal record that would make her a liability. From her perspective, however, accepting such a position would solve exactly none of her problems while creating dozens of new ones. "What if I say no?" she asked. "Honestly, I don't know," Carlucci admitted. "Torino doesn't handle rejection well, but he also doesn't like to waste valuable assets. My guess is he'd try to find some other way to bring you into the organization. And if that doesn't work," Carlucci's expression darkened, "then he'd probably decide you're too dangerous to leave as a loose end." Maya's phone buzzed with a text message. Elena, updating her on arrival details and asking for a situation report. Maya quickly typed back a summary of the evening's events and the planned meeting with Torino. Elena's response came back immediately. "Are you insane?" Maya showed the text to Carlucci, who read it and nodded approvingly. "Your friend has good instincts," he said. "Meeting with Torino is dangerous under the best circumstances. Meeting with him after hospitalizing 3 of his employees is borderline suicidal." "Maybe," Maya said. "But the alternative is spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering when he's going to send someone else after Carlos. I'd rather deal with this problem directly." Tommy Morrison spoke up again, his voice still weak but gaining strength. "There's something you should know about tomorrow night's meeting." Maya turned to face him. "What?" "Torino never meets alone. Even in neutral locations, he always has backup positioned nearby. Security, weapons, escape routes, the whole package." "How many people are we talking about?" "Depends on the situation. For a meeting like this, probably 6 to 8 men, all armed, all experienced." Maya absorbed this information while running tactical calculations in her head. 8 armed men with professional training represented a significant force multiplier, even in a controlled environment. Sarah's surveillance package would help, but it wouldn't eliminate the fundamental disadvantage of being outnumbered 4 to 1. Unless, of course, she wasn't actually outnumbered. Maya pulled out her phone again and started composing a text message. To Elena, change of plans. Instead of party favors, I need party guests. How many of the old crew can you reach by tomorrow afternoon? Elena's response took several minutes, during which Maya could imagine her former squad leader working through contact lists and calling in favors from people scattered across the country. Potentially 4, maybe 5 if we're lucky. But Rodriguez, you're talking about bringing military personnel into what's essentially a criminal conflict. That's a line we can't uncross. Maya stared at the text message, weighing the implications of what she was considering. Alina was right. Involving active or former military personnel in civilian law enforcement matters was legally and ethically complex, but the alternative was walking into a meeting with a weapons trafficker while outnumbered and outgunned. "What are you thinking?" Carlucci asked, apparently reading her expression. "I'm thinking that if Anthony Torino wants to meet the real Maya Rodriguez, he's going to get exactly what he asked for." She typed back to Alina, "Not military personnel. Private security contractors. Sarah Blackwood's people need experienced consultants for a high-risk client protection detail. Completely legitimate business transaction." Alina's response was immediate. "Bullshit. But I'm in. Who else do you want me to call?" Maya smiled for the first time since this whole situation had started. Some bonds really were stronger than time, distance, or the complications of civilian life. "Get me Johnson, Patterson, and Williams. If they're available," she texted back. "Tell them it's a Maya Rodriguez situation." A Maya Rodriguez situation was code from their Afghanistan deployment, shorthand for missions where the official rules of engagement didn't quite cover the tactical realities on the ground, and where success depended on trusting your team to make the right decisions under pressure. Within an hour, Maya had confirmation that 3 of her former squad mates would be on flights to Atlanta by noon. Johnson was coming from Houston, Patterson from Denver, and Williams from Jacksonville. All of them were currently working in private security or consulting, which meant they had legitimate business reasons for being in Atlanta and access to the kinds of equipment that might prove useful in a high-stakes negotiation. "Your friends are really coming?" Tommy asked, seemingly amazed that Maya could assemble a team of military contractors with a few phone calls. "They're not just friends," Maya replied. "They're family. And Anthony Torino is about to learn what happens when you threaten Rodriguez's family." Vincent Carlucci was looking at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You know, if things go the way you're planning, there's no going back to your quiet civilian life." Maya looked around Benny's all-night diner, taking in the cracked vinyl booths, the flickering neon sign, the coffee-stained uniform she'd been wearing when this all started. For 8 months, this place had represented safety, normalcy, and the possibility of a future that didn't involve weapons and violence and the constant calculation of threats. But that future had been built on the illusion that she could leave her past behind, that the skills and experiences that defined her could be compartmentalized and ignored. Tonight had shattered that illusion, forcing her to confront the reality that some transformations were permanent. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," she said. The private dining room at the Atlanta Marriott looked innocuous enough polished. Mahogany table, leather chairs, tasteful artwork on the walls. But Maya knew that appearances could be deceiving. Behind the elegant facade, Sarah Blackwood had installed enough surveillance equipment to monitor a small military base. Maya arrived 30 minutes early, wearing a simple black dress that concealed the ceramic body armor Sarah had provided and the compact Glock 19 holstered at the small of her back. She'd chosen the outfit carefully, professional enough to show respect for the meeting, fitted enough to allow full range of motion if things went sideways. Elena Martinez sat at the bar in the hotel lobby, nursing a martini and reading a newspaper. Like any other business traveler, Johnson was positioned in the parking garage, monitoring vehicle approaches. Patterson had eyes on the hotel's rear exit. Williams was in the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floors, ready to respond to any situation that might develop. Sarah's voice crackled through Maya's nearly invisible earpiece. Torino's convoy just turned onto Peachtree Street. 3 vehicles, approximately 12 occupants total. Maya felt her heartbeat steady into the rhythm she remembered from pre-mission briefings in Afghanistan. The familiar cocktail of adrenaline and hyper-alert calm that had kept her alive through 2 combat deployments was flowing through her system now, sharpening her senses and slowing down time. "Copy that," she whispered. then took her position at the head of the mahogany table. Anthony Torino entered the dining room exactly on time, flanked by 2 bodyguards who swept the room with professional efficiency before taking positions near the door. Torino himself was smaller than Maya had expected, maybe 5'8", with silver hair and a kind of expensive suit that suggested successful criminal enterprise rather than street-level thuggery. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, extending a manicured hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Maya shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the way his eyes catalogued every detail of her appearance and positioning. Anthony Torino had survived decades in a violent business by being observant and careful, and she could see those instincts working now. "Mr. Torino," she replied, "I believe we have some things to discuss." They sat across from each other at the polished table, 2 professionals evaluating each other across what might become a battlefield. Torino's bodyguards remained standing, their hands positioned for quick access to concealed weapons. Maya kept her own hands visible on the table, projecting calm confidence while maintaining tactical awareness of every person and object in the room. "I understand you had an eventful evening with some of my employees," Torino said, getting straight to the point. "They came to my workplace and threatened my family," Maya replied. I responded appropriately. "Appropriately?" Torino raised an eyebrow. "Vincent Carlucci is a former Marine with 3 combat deployments. Jerome Washington spent 5 years in prison, where he learned to handle himself in violent situations. Tommy Morrison grew up on the streets and has been in more fights than most people have had hot meals. You put all 3 of them down in 30 seconds. I had motivation." Torino leaned back in his chair, studying her with the calculating gaze of a man accustomed to reading people's strengths and weaknesses. "Yes, you did. And that's exactly why I wanted to meet with you. I'm listening. My organization has been expanding rapidly over the past 2 years. New markets, new products, new challenges that require specialized expertise. I've been looking for someone with your particular combination of skills and motivation to oversee my Atlanta operations." Maya had expected this offer, but hearing it spelled out explicitly still sent a chill down her spine. Anthony Torino wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her a chance to become everything she'd spent 8 months trying not to be. "What makes you think I'd be interested in working for you?" she asked. "Because you're wasted as a waitress," Torino said simply. "You have talents that could be put to much better use, and I'm prepared to compensate you accordingly. 6-figure salary, full benefits, and most importantly, protection for your family." "Protection from what?" "From the kind of people who might threaten them in order to get to you. The kind of people who might see your brother as leverage to be used against someone with your capabilities." The implicit threat was clear: work for me, or spend the rest of your life wondering when someone else might target Carlos to get to you. It was elegantly manipulative, offering security while simultaneously highlighting the very vulnerabilities that made security necessary. "And if I decline your generous offer?" Maya asked. Torino's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the atmosphere of the room. His bodyguards tensed almost imperceptibly, their weight shifting forward onto the balls of their feet. "Then we have a problem," Torino said. "You see, Ms. Rodriguez, you've demonstrated capabilities that make you either a valuable asset or a significant threat. I prefer assets to threats." Maya felt Sarah's voice in her earpiece. 6 additional vehicles just arrived. Torino's got backup positioning around the building. The timeline was accelerating. Whatever was going to happen in this room, it needed to happen soon before Torino's reinforcements could establish a perimeter that would make extraction difficult. "I have a counter-proposal," Maya said. "I'm listening." "You forget that Diego Morales ever existed. You forget that anyone named Rodriguez owes you money. You take your operations back to Phoenix and leave Atlanta to people who actually live here." Torino smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's not how this business works, Ms. Rodriguez. Debts don't disappear because debtors do. Territory doesn't get abandoned because local competition requests it. What if the local competition makes it too expensive to maintain? Are you threatening me? I'm explaining the economics of the situation. You came to Atlanta looking for one person who owed you money. Now you're sitting across from someone who can make continuing operations here cost more than any potential profit. Torino's smile faded. You're talking about warfare, Miss Rodriguez. Are you prepared for the consequences of that? Maya leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact with the man who had threatened her family. Mr. Torino, I spent 3 years in Afghanistan fighting people who thought they understood warfare better than I did. Most of them were wrong. Afghanistan was a long way from here, one of Torino's bodyguards interjected. Different rules, different support structure. Maya turned her attention to the bodyguard, noting his posture and positioning. You're right. In Afghanistan, there were rules of engagement, chain of command, restrictions on civilian casualties. Here, there are no such limitations. Elena's voice crackled in her earpiece. Torino's perimeter team is moving into position. We need to wrap this up. Maya stood up from the table, her movements smooth and controlled. Mr. Torino, I'm going to give you 24 hours to reconsider your position. After that, continuing operations in Atlanta becomes a business decision I can't recommend. Sit down, Ms. Rodriguez, Torino said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. We're not finished here. Actually, we are, Maya replied, walking toward the door. The bodyguard nearest to her moved to block her path, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Maya's response was instantaneous and decisive. A knife hand strike to his throat that sent him stumbling backward, gasping for air. The second bodyguard was drawing his weapon when the dining room door burst open and Elena Martinez entered. With the fluid precision of a seasoned operator, the bodyguard's attention split between Maya and this new threat, a moment of hesitation that proved fatal to his tactical position. Elena's taser caught him center mass, 50,000 volts dropping him to the expensive carpet in convulsions. Maya had her Glock drawn and trained on Anthony Torino before the man's brain could fully process what was happening. Hands on the table, Maya said calmly, slowly. Torino complied, his eyes darting between Maya's weapon and the door where more of his security team might be arriving at any moment. You're making a mistake, he said. You can't fight my entire organization. Watch me, Maya replied, Sarah's voice in her earpiece. Building is secure. Torino's backup has been detained by hotel security. Apparently someone called in a bomb threat that required immediate evacuation of all unauthorized personnel. Maya smiled. Sarah Blackwood's security consulting business apparently included services that weren't listed on their official website. Mr. Torino, Maya said, her weapon still trained on him, I want you to understand something very clearly. I didn't spend 3 years in the Rangers learning to follow orders. I learned to complete missions. Right now, my mission is protecting my family. Your organization represents a threat to that mission. You can't eliminate an entire criminal enterprise, Torino said. Even if you could, there would be others to take my place. Maybe, but they would learn from your example about the cost of threatening the Rodriguez family. Elena had zip-tied both bodyguards and was now standing beside Maya, her own weapon drawn. Rodriguez, we need to move. Local law enforcement is going to respond to that bomb threat soon. Maya nodded but kept her attention focused on Anthony Torino. 24 hours, she repeated. After that, I start working my way through your organization until I find everyone who knows Carlos exists. She backed toward the door, maintaining sightlines on Torino while Elena covered their exit. In the hallway outside, Johnson and Patterson were waiting with equipment bags and the kind of tactical gear that suggested this meeting had always been intended to end one way. Williams has the stairwell clear, Johnson reported. But we've got Atlanta PD units responding to the bomb threat. Window for clean extraction is closing fast. They moved through the hotel like a well-rehearsed team, using service corridors and maintenance access points that Sarah had mapped during her security survey. Maya felt the familiar rhythm of tactical movement, the wordless coordination that came from training and shared experience. In the parking garage, Williams was waiting beside two black SUVs with engines running. Sarah's handling the security footage, he reported. Far as anyone will know, we were never here. Maya paused before getting into the vehicle, looking back toward the hotel where Anthony Torino was presumably still sitting in the dining room. Trying to decide whether she was bluffing about her ability to dismantle his criminal organization, she wasn't bluffing. Elena climbed into the passenger seat beside her. So what's the plan, Rodriguez? Maya started the engine and pulled out of the parking garage, merging into Atlanta traffic like any other late-night commuter. Torino thinks this is about business, debts and territory, and criminal economics. He's wrong. What's it about? Family. And I learned a long time ago that there's no tactical problem that can't be solved with sufficient motivation and appropriate application of force. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. Maya showed the message to Elena, who read it and shook her head. Some people never learn. No, Maya agreed. But they will. 3 hours later, Maya was back in her apartment above the laundromat, packing clothes and personal items into a military surplus duffel bag. The quiet civilian life she'd built in Atlanta was over, whether by choice or necessity. But for the first time in 8 months, she felt like herself again. Her phone rang. Sarah Blackwood. I've got a proposition for you, Sarah said without preamble. Blackwood Security could use a partner with your specific skill set. Particularly someone experienced in resolving complex threat scenarios. Maya looked around the apartment that had represented 8 months of trying to be someone she wasn't. What kind of threat scenarios? The kind where standard security protocols aren't sufficient. The kind that require creative solutions and specialized expertise. And the pay? Better than waiting tables. Plus, it comes with the kind of medical and dental coverage that most military contractors would kill for. Maya smiled, shouldering the duffel bag and taking one last look around the place that had been home. When do I start? How about tomorrow? I've got a client in Miami who's been receiving some very unfriendly attention from organized crime figures. Apparently, someone's been threatening his family. Maya walked toward the door, her footsteps echoing in the empty apartment. Sarah, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership. 6 months later, Anthony Torino's criminal organization no longer operated east of the Mississippi River. Official records showed that key personnel had relocated to other regions for personal reasons, while unofficial sources suggested that continuing operations in certain territories had become prohibitively expensive due to unexplained equipment failures, security breaches, and personnel retention issues. Maya Rodriguez never returned to Phoenix, but Carlos came to live with her in a secure apartment complex in downtown Atlanta that specialized in housing federal witnesses and other individuals requiring enhanced personal security. He enrolled at a private school that emphasized academic excellence and character development, and he never asked why his sister sometimes left town on business trips that she couldn't discuss. Benny's all-night diner hired a new waitress to work the graveyard shift, a college student who served coffee and took orders and never had to worry about dangerous men walking through the door with threats and demands. The new waitress never knew that her quiet job existed because a former Army Ranger had decided that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. Maya had learned that leaving the military didn't mean leaving behind the bonds forged in combat, or the skills developed under fire. It meant finding new ways to use those bonds and skills in service of the things that mattered most. And in the end, Protecting the family was a mission that never really ended. It just evolved into new theaters of operation with different rules of engagement, but the same fundamental objective. The thugs who had surrounded a waitress in a small diner had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving, that quiet strength often ran deeper than obvious threats, and that some people were dangerous not because of what they wanted, but because of what they were willing to sacrifice to protect the people they loved. Maya Rodriguez had come home from war thinking she needed to become someone else. Instead, she had discovered that the person she already was, soldier, protector, sister, was exactly who the world needed her to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.